Have you ever stopped in the middle of your stress and asked yourself, where is this even coming from? Not just the surface level stuff, deadlines, traffic, bills, but the deeper, more existential kind of stress. The kind that simmers beneath everything, even on your best days. The kind of tension that lives in your chest, even when life is technically fine. I have. And here's the painful, liberating truth I found. We're stressed not just because life is hard, but because we've made ourselves dependent on things we can't control, especially other people. Their opinions, their approval, their responses, their attention. Somewhere along the way, we made the unconscious decision that our peace, our value, our identity must be validated by someone else. And that decision has cursed us. It has chained our happiness to things that shift like shadows. And unless we confront that curse head-on, we'll keep living like ghosts, haunted by the fear of rejection, the need to be understood, the hunger to be seen. This video isn't about blaming others or even escaping them. It's about reclaiming ourselves. It's about waking up from the trance of needing others to feel whole. And it starts right now. Pause and really ask yourself this: how much of your emotional life is dictated by your relationships with other people? I don't mean just romantic ones. I mean your boss, your parents, your friends, your social media audience. How many of your thoughts are rehearsals for imaginary conversations? How often do you shift your behavior just to avoid disapproval or gain praise? And here's the kicker: how often do you not do something meaningful because you're afraid someone else won't get it, won't like it, or will think less of you? This is the curse. Not that we love others, but that we need them to validate us. And the moment we need someone to approve of us in order to feel okay, we've given them a kind of power over us that no one should have. We've handed them the remote control to our inner peace and said, "Here, press pause or play whenever you feel like it." That's not love. That's not connection. That's ego dependency disguised as emotional life. And the Stoics saw this coming thousands of years ago.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Epictetus said something that cracked me open the first time I truly understood it. If you want to be free, learn to wish that everything happens exactly as it does. That sounds insane at first. Why would we want things we don't like to happen? But then you realize he's not talking about passivity. He's talking about power. He's saying that the only way to be mentally and emotionally free is to stop demanding the world to conform to your preferences, including the people in it. Especially the people in it. And that includes their opinions, their love, their recognition, even their loyalty. Because the moment your internal state is tied to something external, you become a slave to contingency. You become fragile, and fragility is stress. So, if you're constantly stressed, maybe it's not because your life is broken, but because your expectations are. You expect others to understand you, to validate you, to always be there, to mirror your values. But they won't. Not always. Sometimes not ever. And it's not your job to fix that. It's your job to release your attachment to it. Let's go even deeper. Think about how much of modern stress is performative. We're not just trying to survive anymore, we're trying to curate. Think of social media. Think of how carefully we craft the image of ourselves. Why? Because we want others to see us a certain way. We want to be admired, envied, adored. And any time that image is threatened by silence, by a bad comment, by someone else getting more attention, we panic. That's not just insecurity, that's identity confusion. We've mistaken our reflection in other people's minds for who we actually are. But who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when there's no one left to impress? That's a terrifying question for most people. But it's the most important one you'll ever ask. Because until you answer it, you'll keep outsourcing your worth. You'll keep managing perceptions instead of living your truth. And nothing will ever feel enough. That's the great lie of needing others. It promises peace through connection, but it delivers anxiety through dependence. And here's where the contradiction hits like a freight train. As humans, we're wired for connection. True. But the deepest, most meaningful connections only happen when you don't need them to complete you. When you show up whole. When you're not clinging. When you're not performing. When you're not trying to extract identity from someone else's attention. That's when love becomes real. That's when friendship becomes deep. When it's no longer a transaction for emotional safety, but a shared experience of mutual presence. And ironically, the less you need others, the more fully you can love them. Because now your love isn't about filling a hole, it's about overflowing. It's about giving, not grasping. And when you live that way, your stress dissolves. Not because life gets easier, but because you're not trying to squeeze peace out of things that were never meant to give it. Let me ask you something that might sting a little. What are you pretending to be just so someone else will like you? Think about that. What parts of yourself have you muted, edited, or exaggerated just to avoid disconnection? And what's the cost of that self-abandonment? Because every time you deny your truth for the sake of harmony, you fracture your soul a little more. You teach yourself that being loved is more important than being real. And that lesson becomes internalized stress, a constant background hum of tension, confusion, exhaustion. But what if instead you chose to be real, even if it means being misunderstood? What if you chose to be whole, even if it means being alone for a while? That's the kind of choice the Stoics lived for. Not comfort, not applause, but integrity. Because they knew that the only thing worse than being rejected by others is being rejected by yourself. So how do we untangle this curse? Slowly, intentionally, philosophically. First, we have to stop seeing people as emotional vending machines. They're not here to give you certainty. They're not here to complete your story. They're here to walk beside you, if they choose, if they're able. But their presence doesn't define your path. You do. Second, we have to build what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a place within yourself that no one else can touch, not with criticism, not with praise, not with love, not with absence. A place governed by reason, self-respect, and a commitment to virtue. That's where peace lives. Not in other people's approval, but in your own alignment. And finally, we have to practice detachment not from love, but from neediness, from the illusion that we are incomplete without someone else's validation. Because the truth is, you were whole before they saw you. You are still whole if they walk away. And you will remain whole long after the world forgets your name. That's not loneliness, that's liberation. So let me leave you with this question. If no one else ever praised you again, would you still live the life you're living now? Would you still pursue the same goals? Say the same words? Express the same truths? Or would you change? That question reveals everything. because the more your answer depends on others, the more stress you will carry. But the more your answer comes from within, the more peace you will feel, unshakable, unbothered, unstoppable. We live in a world that builds everything outward. We craft careers, reputations, online identities, pay and social circles with incredible precision, but often neglect the one structure that determines whether we survive the storms of life or collapse under them, our inner citadel. The Stoics spoke of this not as a metaphor, but as a necessity. The inner citadel is the fortress of your soul, your unshakable core, built not of walls and weapons, but of wisdom, virtue, and self-possession. It's the place you retreat to when the world turns cold, when people leave, when plans fall apart. And here's the truth, most of us don't have one. We've built skyscrapers of ambition and paper-thin shelters of inner strength. So when life hits, and it always does, we shatter. We panic. We grasp for others to save us, to make us feel whole again. But what if we stopped doing that? What if we stopped outsourcing our sense of self to people who are just as lost as we are? What if we built something inside ourselves that could withstand the silence, the solitude, the storm? The first stone in the foundation of your inner citadel is self-knowledge. You cannot defend who you are if you do not know who you are. And most people don't. They know how others see them. They know who they're supposed to be. But they don't know what they actually believe, in what they value when no one is watching, what they're willing to suffer for, what they're unwilling to betray. This is why journaling, reflection, solitude, they aren't luxuries. They're lifelines. Because in those quiet moments, stripped of noise and expectation, something begins to emerge, you. Not the version of you that's curated for applause, but the raw, honest core of you. And that core is the beginning of your strength. Because from here, you can start to make decisions not based on fear or approval, but based on alignment. Every time you act in alignment with your values, you reinforce your citadel. Every time you betray your truth for comfort, you weaken it. So ask yourself, what are the non-negotiables of your soul? What are the principles you would rather suffer for than live without? If you don't know, you're vulnerable. If you do know, you're already on your way to becoming untouchable. The next layer is emotional discipline, not suppression, not denial, but discipline, the ability to feel without being ruled, to experience pain without collapsing into chaos. This is where most of us struggle, because we've been taught that emotions are either enemies or gods. They're neither. They're signals. And like any signal, they must be interpreted, not obeyed blindly. The Stoics trained themselves to pause between stimulus and response, to ask, is this feeling useful? Is it aligned with reason? Is it helping me live according to virtue, or is it dragging me into ego, fear, or illusion? But that pause is where freedom begins. The moment between the insult and your reaction, the heartbreak and your interpretation, the failure and your narrative about what it means. In that pause, you reclaim your power. You are no longer a puppet of the world's chaos, you are the author of your own response. And that authorship is the backbone of the inner citadel. Because once you realize that no one can make you feel anything without your consent, you stop being emotionally blackmailed by others. You stop needing people to behave a certain way in order for you to feel okay. You become emotionally sovereign. And now comes the roof of the citadel, the mindset of radical responsibility. This is where we stop blaming others for our inner state, not because they didn't hurt us, not because they were justified, but because we refuse to give them the keys to our peace. Every time you say, "I'm like this because of what they did," you're reinforcing your own imprisonment. But when you say, "I choose how to respond, no matter what they did," you're stepping back into freedom. The Stoics weren't naive. They knew people could be cruel, unjust, even evil. But they also knew that moral clarity, once cultivated, could never be taken, only surrendered. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's the Stoic blueprint. Don't curse the obstacle. Use it. Don't retreat from the pain. Transform it. Don't wait for the world to apologize. Rise anyway. Paul, that's what the inner citadel allows you to do, to meet life exactly as it is, without flinching, without folding, without falling into the trap of needing someone else to fix what only you can heal. But let's be brutally honest. This kind of self-mastery is hard. It's not flashy. It's not something you can post. It won't get you instant validation. In fact, building your inner citadel might mean losing people. It might mean walking away from relationships built on emotional dependence. It might mean standing alone in your truth while everyone else chases approval in disguise. But here's the paradox. The more you build your inner strength, the more peace you'll feel, even in solitude. And the more peace you feel, the more clearly you'll love, not from need, but from abundance. Because real love can only come from wholeness. Everything else is just a transaction dressed up as intimacy. So let me ask you something that may change your life. If everyone you depend on emotionally were to disappear tomorrow, who would you be? Could you still live well? Could you still act with purpose? Could you still find meaning, not in their presence, but in your own alignment? That's the test of the citadel. And it's not just a theory, it's a practice. It's built every time you say no to the easy path and yes to the right one. Every time you keep your word when no one else is holding you accountable. Every time you feel fear, doubt, or longing and still choose integrity over impulse. That's how you build something unbreakable, not through perfection, but through persistence. We don't just live our lives, we perform them. Almost every move we make is done with an audience in mind, whether real or imagined. We post, speak, achieve, and even suffer for how it will appear to others. And the more we perform, the further we drift from ourselves. This is the invisible theater most people live in without realizing it, constantly scanning for cues, adjusting their tone, reshaping their identity not for truth, but for applause. And the applause rarely comes, or if it does, it never stays. So we chase more. We curate more. We bend ourselves into increasingly exhausting shapes, seeking validation from people who are often just as lost, just as hungry for attention, just as afraid. And this is why we're always stressed. Not because life is inherently overwhelming, but because we've made the audience our master. We've handed over our peace, our authenticity, and our choices to people who were never supposed to carry that weight. The Stoics would look at this frantic performance and ask us the ultimate grounding question: why are you living for spectators who don't even know your soul? Epictetus reminded us that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and nowhere is that more true than in the stories we invent about what others think of us. But here's the truth most people are too afraid to admit. No one is thinking about you as much as you think they are. People are too absorbed in their own performances to really scrutinize yours. And even if they did, so what? Their opinion isn't a mirror. It's a projection. So the more we live for their approval, the more distorted we become. Real freedom begins the moment we stop living for the audience and start living in alignment with our own values. That's the Stoic revolution, not to become indifferent to people, but to become free from needing their applause to feel worthy. Because when you stop performing, you start being. You start speaking your truth without fear. You start walking your path without asking for directions. You start doing what is right, not what is liked. And that is rare. That is powerful. That is peace. But how do we get there? We start by noticing the masks. You know the ones. The version of you that shows up in a meeting and laughs too loudly at a joke that isn't funny. And the version that posts something online not because it's meaningful, but because it will get likes. The version that says yes when your soul is screaming no. That's the mask, and it's heavy. But you keep wearing it because you're afraid that if you take it off, you'll be invisible. But here's the paradox. The longer you wear the mask, the more invisible you become to yourself. And if you spend your life being liked for a version of you that isn't real, what have you actually gained? The Stoics would say, nothing, worse than nothing. You've lost yourself in the process. And no amount of external approval can replace that loss. So the real courage is not in being admired, it's in being authentic. But even when that authenticity costs you something, even when it makes people uncomfortable, even when it means being misunderstood. Because the moment you choose authenticity over performance, you reclaim your life. You stop living in reaction to the crowd. You stop editing yourself to fit expectations. You stop chasing applause and start building something deeper, respect for your own soul. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but we care more about their opinion than our own." Think about that. You are the one who has to live with yourself every moment of your life. But you're outsourcing your choices to people who won't be there when you're alone at night, wrestling with regret. That's madness. And yet we do it every day. Unless we stop. Unless we choose a different way, a Stoic way. A way of living that doesn't depend on applause or likes or followers. A way that measures success not by what others see, but by how deeply we're living in truth. That's the way of the inner citadel. That's the way of freedom. But let's be clear, this isn't a rejection of people. It's a reordering of priorities. It's remembering that the most important relationship you have is with your own conscience. And when that relationship is strong, you can walk through the world with a calm that no rejection can shake. You become immune to manipulation, to flattery, to fear. Because your compass is internal, and that compass will guide you home again and again, no matter how lost the world becomes. So let me leave you with one final, world-shifting question. If no one ever knew what you did, would you still do it? Would you still be kind, even if no one praised you? Would you still speak truth, even if it cost you popularity? Would you still create love, build, serve, if you knew no one else would ever applaud it? That's the test, that's the path. That's where stress ends and freedom begins, not in controlling the audience, but in no longer needing one. And once you get there, you'll never go back. Because you'll realize that the peace you were chasing through performance was never out there. It was always inside, waiting for you to stop acting and start living.